Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest self-titled album from Jason Eady. You know, it's a bit of a trend for indie country critics, and I include myself in this category, to assert that when it comes to Jason Eady, some people should probably just leave the room. If you're coming in looking for pop country or style or anything to detract from what many have deemed some of the purest music in the entire genre of country, especially out of Texas, this is probably not for you. If you're looking for something that might actually cross over into the mainstream that you would hear on the radio, well, maybe locally in Texas, but I'm only qualified to say that because the mainstream country scene has no idea what it's doing right now. Radio is flailing and throwing anything at the wall to see what might stick, from Chris Stapleton to Thomas Rhett. And it's not like Jason Eady didn't dabble with softer tones on AM Country Heaven in 2012 that could have potentially crossed over in that year. Suffice to say, he didn't stick with that sound. In early 2014, he delivered Daylight and Dark, a stunningly pure shot of fantastic country music that, if not for Run the Jewels, would have topped my best albums list of that year. And while so many have lined up to praise Sturgill Simpson, Jason Isbell, and Chris Stapleton, and the other indie darlings as the scene has inflated and then exploded over the past couple of years, Jason Eady, he seemed to have slipped out of the picture. And yeah, I partially blame myself for that, because when he dropped an acoustic duets album with his wife Courtney Patton called Something Together in December of 2016, I missed covering it too. I only covered it in early 2017. Part of it is country's lousy web presence, but Jason Eady also seems to run just below the radar for too many people, and some for whom I played his material can get a little bit intimidated by his soft, plain-spoken yet very cutting delivery. For a lot of people, it's a purer form of country than they can reasonably handle. In other words, this was among my most anticipated albums of this year, and I had the highest of expectations going in, especially considering his songwriting only seems to be getting more refined with every single passing album. So okay, what did he deliver on this self-titled album? Well, okay, look. You all knew I was gonna love this, and I definitely do, no question about it. It's easily one of the best albums of 2017, and I can see this making a very credible challenge for the top 5. Even to the people who don't normally listen to country that I've shown this to like this album, showing that Jason Eady can make a slightly more accessible record while still preserving the quality in the instrumentation, production, and songwriting. The big question is whether or not it's a stronger work than Daylight and Dark, and that's a much more difficult question to evaluate, even if it really just comes down to the finest of details and nitpicking. And yet, to some extent, that's even irrelevant, because everybody should have gone out to get this album yesterday. It is that fantastic. And you know what? Here's the thing. As much as this met my expectations and more, I want to emphasize that the lack of surprise that this was great on my part, that's not anything against this self-titled record's quality, because you could make the argument that it's an even tighter, more refined work than its predecessor. I mean, for Daylight and Dark, the two most noticeable flaws that I can call out in the 3 years that I've been listening to it pretty much continuously are the clumsiness of One Too Many that feels a tad overdone, and the closing track of Memory Now with Hayes Carl and Evan Felker, which doesn't quite fit in with the record's lyrical tone and strikes me as a bit of a weak ending for an otherwise fantastic album, while still being a good song. This self-titled record, meanwhile, neither issue. Slimmed down to just 10 songs this time, just over a half hour, and opting for a slight uptick in tempo and overall mood. There isn't room for any dead weight, and frankly, there isn't any. Not in the composition or in any of the writing. And that sense of refinement also applies to the instrumentation and production. There aren't any flourishes, gimmicks, extra reverb, extended instrumental solos to show off the technical prowess of the veterans that Jason Eady is working with, or even an electric guitar on this album. Now, to some people, this will probably be viewed as bare bones, but the approach and the reason for this is two-pronged. For one, it's designed to showcase some phenomenal, full and organic tones and pickups courtesy of the guitars, the mandolin, the banjo, and especially the fiddle that I just absolutely loved. And secondly, it's designed to place all the emphasis on our frontman and his writing, with the backing vocals only slipping in from his wife, Courtney Patton, or on No Genie in This Bottle from Vince Gill himself. And I really do want to highlight Kevin Welch's production here, because there's a lot of skill in grasping the fullness of the instrumental pickups to highlight the ragged edges without coming across as sloppy, and in the vocal arrangements, keeping things things intimate, but not to the point of being claustrophobic. And considering that Jason Eady is such a plain-spoken, subtle performer in his own right, he's not a naturally commanding or bombastic singer, but managed to contain enough quiet intensity to really pull the audience in naturally. That production has to be on point, or it would seem a little bit less organic, and that was never going to be part of the equation. Now, look, I can see some people immediately disregarding the arrangements here as being unexceptional or a little bit traditional for country, or Jason Eady's delivery as being too low-key, reflecting a restraint that he doesn't really need at this point of his career. But that's the thing, this doesn't feel unnatural or out of Jason Eady's comfort zone in stripping things back, which makes sense for a more personal record. And it feels like a record of subtleties that is middle-aged because Jason Eady himself is middle-aged, so why compromise that truth? But that places tremendous weight on the writing itself, and for Jason Eady to draw out the same sort of nuance there, and man, does he really stick the landing, does he ever? Again, the strength to his writing has always been its ability to use very simple language to convey real subtleties of emotional situations that reflect real humanity beneath them. But whereas most of Daylight and Dark was spent unsteadily walking the thin line between balance of good and bad impulses, this feels like it has come a little bit later in the protagonist's life, with grievances more settled and his gait a little bit more stable, even if the destination down the road might not be more stable. And the fact that he opened up this album with Barabbas is the best possible example of this. Recontextualizing the passion story and taking the perspective of the bandit released instead of Jesus, it's a gut punch of a track as he sorts through feelings of fear, confusion, guilt, relief, and a newfound question of faith he doesn't even quite grasp. How this song was never interpreted before in country music, how this concept never was, I will never get that. And when you follow it a few songs later with Black Jesus, reminiscence of an old musician friend in Georgia where they both worked construction jobs and the acknowledgement of the more similarities they shared than their differences, again, it reflects the maturity and the shades of gray that this record inhabits so damn effectively. And that's what also makes the relationship songs naturally get more complicated. The post-breakup yearning for a genie to correct his old mistakes and vices on No Genie in This Bottle. And yet, even as he knows that none of it is likely ever going to happen, I do really like the sentiment in the verse that after trying to correct himself with that one wish, he'd actually just set the genie free. It's a beautiful little detail, but it says a lot about Jason Eady's character that really refines this album. Similar case for the relationship of Where I've Been, where it's been remade as a solo track from Something Together and seems to accentuate the lonely disconnection and failed love that inspired the girl to seek passion elsewhere. And if the guy's passion comes back, she will be there. And yet, if you listen, you can hear Courtney Patton's background track to echo those words, and that's really, really poignant. Now, that's not saying some things aren't a little bit more straightforward, but of course, Jason Eady finds a way to add a spin to them, either through the arrangement or the writing that I really do admire. It's subtle, but it is there, like the inclusion of Courtney Patton's backing vocals on the post-breakup Get Over Her song Drive, implying that she might just be doing the same despite his own feelings, or how Waiting to Shine in its songwriting metaphor of mining words from coal to build songs, it uses the fact that Courtney Patton is also a songwriter to show how her whisper can spur the search for more words anew. Sure, it's blatantly meta, but in the best way possible. And it's also not saying that Jason Eady isn't bringing some powerful emotions to the table. Not Too Loud is a song about his teenage daughter growing up and getting ready to go to college that beautifully articulates the deep, mingled feelings of pride and longing for her presence that a lot of parents have. I guarantee if you share this with any parent with kids getting ready to leave to go to university or college, it'll stick with them in a really big way. But the track that really serves as the linchpin thematically for this album is the closer, 40 Years, as Jason Eady takes stock of the hard lessons he's learned and is still learning, having now reached middle age, and it's almost too perfect. While he hasn't precisely changed, what he has learned is subtlety. The little emotions and comforts within the bigger picture and the bigger emotions. Nuance isn't just a welcome feature of this project, it's pretty much the theme of the album, and one that I can't praise highly enough, especially for Jason Eady's type of very personal country music. But if we're going to circle back to the question of whether or not it's better than Daylight and Dark, look, there's a part of me that wants to say, shut up, Who cares? They're both incredible records. I think the better answer, though, is that they're made for different points of your life. Daylight and Dark was younger, a little rough around the edges, but they were in learning the lessons that Jason Eady delivers on this project. While they both deserve a lot of attention, I predict this record will probably resonate a lot more deeply with older, or at the very least more mature audiences. And hell, while I'm not all the way there yet, I can still really dig into this. But in terms of quality, 9 out of 10, right now one of the best albums to beat in this year. Jason Eady has managed to mine and refine that diamond hardcore, and frankly, I can't wait to see where he takes it next. But until it does, this album is worth all of your attention, so much more. Buy this record, it is so worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. As I said, this album is spectacular. It's going to be one of the best of this year. The link to buy is in the description below. I heartily recommend you do so. I also have the poll up there, so for those very few of you who will care about country music, this is your chance to tell me what you thought about this album. The last review I covered, Jason Eady, still doesn't even have 1,000 views on that video, so I'm curious how much this is going to end up picking up. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once per week you guys, the higher tiers, get to add records or movies to my schedule. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.